first Zelda game came out in 1986 and was absolutely adored, so it makes sense that Nintendo would want to create a sequel as soon as they could. Enter Zelda II. This game came out less than a year after the first game's release, and is kind of seen as the black sheep of the Zelda games. There's a statement nobody has ever said before. This game wasn't quite as popular as the original game, and plus, much like all things that come second, this one was not quite as legendary. According to the title, at least. Zelda II: The Adventure of Link released on January 14th, 1987 for the Famicom in Japan. It wouldn't release in America until December 1st, 1988, more than a year after the game was released in Japan. This is because of a shortage of ROM chips that prevented Nintendo from releasing a lot of games worldwide. Shigeru Miyamoto produced this game and wanted to make it different from the original, and that is very clear with the game's gameplay, which I will talk about later. There's really not much to go on about the build-up and release of Zelda 2. It was pretty much just made because Zelda 1 was such a hit. The game released and was met with fairly good reviews, but as time went on, people sort of stopped caring about this game. Which is kind of weird, because this game influenced the series a lot. Like, most of the sages from Ocarina of Time are named after towns from this game, and this dragon boss is absolutely the inspiration for Volvagia. So why is this game so forgotten about? Instead of the traditional top-down style from the previous game, they switched it up so it resembles a Metroidvania. This works, and definitely gives the game its own identity. The world is now one massive map, and these little enemies spawn whenever you walk off the road. Bump into one and you'll enter an action scene, where you have to fight enemies while trying to get to either side of the screen to escape. Also on the map, you will come across these towns where you can heal, restore your magic, and even learn new spells. Oh, have I not mentioned? This game is the first Zelda game to feature magic and spells. The spells are all at the very least pretty cool, and range from making you take less damage and giving you a higher jump, to more out there ideas like turning you into a fairy, or the amazing spell that causes secrets to appear in the world. The final thing you will encounter on the map are predetermined action scenes. Sometimes these lead to a secret, like a heart container or a link doll, which gives you an extra life. Or it could be a roadblock, like these bridge sequences, or it could be a cave that could lead somewhere else in the world. Either way, they mainly serve as a way of making the world feel less like a map and more like you're actually adventuring through it, which is important. That's all great. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to play the game so I can fully form an opinion on it. I barely made it past the first dungeon. If you thought that Zelda 1 was hard, then you are not prepared for Zelda 2. I was playing on the NES Online app on the Switch with rewind and save states, and I could barely make it past the first dungeon. After that, you have to go through Death Mountain, and hey look, I found out what the most torturous thing ever created by man is, and it's Death Mountain in Zelda 2. I tried over and over again, and I couldn't do it. So instead I opted to watch a Let's Play. It was actually significantly more enjoyable than it would be if I actually tried beating the game myself. I would love to be able to say that I could do it, but I only have like 25 brain cells left, and I'm not wasting all of them trying to beat Zelda 2. Psycho Plays was the guy I watched, and if you want to watch someone play through Nintendo games and say crud a lot, he's your guy. Anyway, why is this game so difficult? Well, I'm pretty sure that the creators of this game forgot to make enemies have a cooldown for their attacks, so the enemies just attack infinitely, leaving you practically helpless to fight back. Also, this game throws way too much at you too soon. The first annoying enemies you will come across are Iron Knuckles, who really aren't that terrible if you know how to handle them, but then we have Gorias, who will not stop throwing your freaking boomerangs. And then we have Darius, the enemy that caused me to quit. What do I even do in this situation? I don't hate this game for its difficulty. I hate it because it basically sucker punches you and then calls you a baby for not seeing it coming. Then it proceeds to punch you to death while you're whimpering on the floor. This game is also horribly unfair with its punishments. This game works on a life system, like Mario, where you have 3 lives, and when you die, you lose a life and start the screen over. When you get a game over, then you start back at the beginning screen of the game. That makes sense, right? Well, now you have to travel across the entire world to get back to wherever you were, even if you were in a dungeon. Whose bright idea was that? Satan's? Here's the thing though, in the final dungeon of the game, when you get a game over, you start back at the beginning of the dungeon.
Oh, finally. Mercy.
The bosses are all pretty neat for the most part. Sure, one of them is literally just an iron knuckle on a horse until he isn't, but overall most of these are pretty good. I like this dragon guy I mentioned before. I just think he's funny. Also, the final battle being against Dark Link is really cool, and from what I've observed, looks pretty hard. Unless you know the trick where you just squat in the corner and just stab infinitely until he dies. The dungeons in this game are all really well designed, but you already knew that. I have yet to come across a single Zelda game to have poorly designed dungeons. I will say though, the one dungeon with the fake wall is just dumb. How are we supposed to find that out? Graphically, this game looks pretty nice. Now, do I think it looks as nice as the first Zelda game? Not really, but I think the iconicity of the first game's sprites are what makes this game's graphics seem so good. I mean, the Karok boss looks sick, let's be real. The music in Zelda II is very enjoyable. The world theme makes you feel like you were going on an adventure, and the battle theme feels like, you guessed it, a battle. The dungeon theme is amazing and strangely familiar. This game shines the most in its way of making you feel like you are going on a grand adventure. When you start the game, you're standing right by Zelda, who is asleep from a spell cast on her. This single screen is enough to make you feel like you have a mission and that you have to save Zelda. This game features a leveling system that allows you to feel like you are becoming stronger throughout your adventure, and you can even learn new abilities like the upward and downward stab. The upward stab is useful, but the downward stab is easily one of the best abilities in the game. Too bad I gave up before I could reach it. Even the battles against enemies. Sure, battling an iron knuckle now may be seen as tedious, but back in 1988, this would have been seen as a sword fight. Battling out bad guys so that you can save the day. This game is truly the adventure of Link.
This is usually the part of the video where I ask some rhetorical question like, oh, would I recommend this game or not? But I could barely make it past the first dungeon. What do you think my answer is going to be?
This game is hard. There is no getting around that. But this is definitely not a bad game. It absolutely deserves a second chance on hardware that isn't designed to make you pay for a magazine just so you can find out what to do next. If you really feel like playing this game, then crack out a guide and don't be afraid to use restore points and rewind. Now, what do I think of this game in comparison to the first Zelda game? I think that while this game is an incredible experience, it is really bogged down by its difficulty, and unfortunately, since I couldn't get that far into the game, I would say I enjoyed Zelda 1 a bit more. However, Zelda 2 is probably the overall better game.
It's a shame that this game is so impossibly hard, because it would be seen as one of the best Zelda games, for sure, if it wasn't. But now we're done with the NES Zelda games, the growing pains of the series, if you will. Which means that the next ones that I talk about are when the series starts getting really good.